What has given you so much joy in doing the careers that you are involved in right now?
Well, let me go first. I come from a context where I was born into a spiritual life. I come from a very religious background, a Reformed tradition, within the Christian tradition, that is the Reformed tradition. And it was almost a given that when you're born into that tradition, you will believe, you will go to church, you will go to Sunday school, you will. At the age of 18, I realized that the God of apartheid was not for me. And it was a very traumatic yet honest moment when I was confirmed that I stood in the church. I didn't speak it because I respected my family. I respected everything, but I could not honestly stand there and say, I accept you. I stood there and I said, you are not real. You are not God. From that point on, the question of human rights, the rights of people, became my moral map. I became a journalist, but I did discover God. Eventually, in the trenches of life, I did discover God, and I realized that that was the God that not only carried me, more importantly, that was the God that shaped the lives of the women, children, men, whom I encountered in countless stories, and that is where I got my faith, and my faith was never removed from my work and my passion.
Thank you. So I think I found my way to journalism also quite early at 17 or 18. And after I started really working in the field, I found I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it for two reasons. One was very selfish. One was the capability to indulge my deep curiosity and to give me permission to learn endlessly about the world around me and on any topic that I found particularly interesting. I find people very interesting. And so journalism was really a selfish way for me to exercise my curiosity. It also, however, was balanced, and I think this was critical because it made it feel worthwhile, with an altruistic aspect, which was my willingness to take my time and go places and see things and be with people and in situations that most people, maybe even most people in their right minds, wouldn't go and experience. And then to bring that understanding that I had developed as a curious person back to a much wider audience and help them see what I had seen, quite literally through photography and then later through writing and through filmmaking. And so it has this wonderful dual capability of satisfying my curiosity, but also delivering a purpose of understanding and compassion and empathy around people who are experiencing something, and in the kind of work I did, often something that would change their lives forever. And so that has been a real honor. And I thank Rinpoche for sharing his teaching, because it is a story. We're telling a story, and journalism has a deep, deep role in shaping the narratives we tell ourselves and the narratives we tell others, and those, I think, shape our ability to act in the world. And so that's my...
Well, I have to say I'm struggling. When you're a student of an indulgent great master, I feel a struggling aspirant and a tough act to follow. And I think that what Rinpoche had flagged was a very key idea. And so I can describe my life as more aspirational than what I've achieved. And And he was talking about the Bodhisattva. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama is believed to be a Bodhisattva of compassion, an incarnation of Avalokiteshvara, the deity he mentioned. And Bodhisattvas are people who prioritize other people. So the aspiration of a Bodhisattva is to teach and serve humanity. And even though they attain enlightenment, which classically entitles them, to use Rinpoche's phrase, rest from continuing in the cycle of birth and rebirth, they voluntarily choose to take human rebirth in order to teach and serve humanity. So that is really the aspiration. But I should hurriedly qualify that. When His Holiness was releasing my first book, he very kindly said that, oh, you know, Rajiv, he works very hard. But how much he knows, I don't know. So I think that is where I am at.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing the personal, before you give us your very studied view of the media and the public trust. So I now invite each of you to offer us your best view of how a media is shaping our lives, is actually creating our lives, and maybe managing how we relate to the world and to other people. So Molly, if you would like to begin, lead us on.
I'm going to step to the podium. There's light here, that's great. Yeah. Thank you. No small task given to us, an assignment. I want to thank Owsley and thank Mustafa and thank the Festival of Faith staff for bringing me home. It's always wonderful to be here, and it's a real honor to be on the stage with this company, so thank you. The journalism organization I founded, ORB, produces journalism that unites us as a global community around our human story. And I want to talk a little bit about the status quo in journalism, the idea of media and the public trust, and the opportunity presented by this great digital era. We all know that trust is gradually earned and quickly lost. Journalism's job is to tell us what's happening and why, especially when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. By thinking critically and applying healthy skepticism to what we're told, to every source, and calling it as we see it without fear or favor, we can accomplish that job on the public's behalf. As journalists, we've lost the public's confidence because on the whole, we're barely doing our job. As members of the public, we now receive images, information, and opinions from around the world, and stitching what is often conflicting information together is incredibly overwhelming. I can only see why a parent working 2 jobs would give up on the media. And ironically, many journalism organizations have achieved a global reach, but still see themselves as serving a specific national or cultural audience. The idea that we can match our global reach by serving a global human audience hasn't really caught on yet. Journalism's still stuck in a very parochial mindset, and the result is a lot of us and them thinking. And from the public's perspective, the presentation of an incredibly fragmented, often conflicting image of our world, where there are lots of contradictions. In this context, it's easy to see how nationalism permeates our journalistic work and can even be used at its worst for a tool for dehumanization and war. Radio Mille Collines broadcasts during the Rwandan genocide are probably the most extreme example of media being used to dehumanize an entire community. Calling the Tutsis cockroaches, the radio called for their Hutu brothers to fill the graves with them. That is wildly blatant, but we do it in more subtle ways all the time. During the 2003 Iraq War, journalism allowed itself to be effectively co-opted. It became a powerful message machine of war, bringing the American public along on an endeavor I still can't explain or justify. Corporations, governments, and armies want to do things. They have an agenda, they're working. To achieve that agenda, be it higher sales or the invasion of another country, they know people need to have a set of beliefs that will allow it. To build those beliefs in the public, they craft a message, and then they doggedly repeat it. Once a message is effectively planted in our minds, it becomes a belief, and we organize our thinking and behavior around it. It's journalism's job to see that mission, smile, and put the press release aside and find out what is really going on. During the invasion and occupation of Iraq, journalism dramatically failed to do that. A great way to lose the confidence of the public as a journalist is to just repeat what you've been told and call it the facts. I was imprisoned by Saddam Hussein's security services in Abu Ghraib in 2003 during the invasion. It was a harrowing time for me personally, and I did think I would die there. It's a story in and of itself, and it's one that I'm happy to have, but for another conversation. I wasn't tortured by Saddam Hussein's guards, even though there was a rich history of that at Abu Ghraib. So there's a personal and frankly quite uncomfortable irony for me when I learned about the torture that was happening in the prison after the American military took over. I worked with an amazing translator in Iraq for almost 14 months, and part of her job was to tell me about what people were talking about on the streets, regardless of what I was assigned to work on and what I had given myself to work on. In October of 2003, she told me about the stories she was hearing about how badly people were being abused at Abu Ghraib. I was a little incredulous that Americans would torture prisoners. It's against our values, I remember telling her. We would never do that. And I dismissed an idea that was really uncomfortable to me. In December 2003, I was interviewing a source for our film, Meeting Resistance, and he talked at length for like an hour and in detail about how people who were arrested were being tortured. He talked about the use of dogs, electrified cages, humiliation, all the things that came to light. And this was 4 months before the story broke. And yet, like a lot of my peers, I missed the story. All I would have done was go and stand outside the gates of Abu Ghraib prison with the thousands of family members of prisoners inside and listen. They would have hundreds of times corroborated a story of torture. But to do that, I would have had to have believed it was possible that the US would torture people. And I now know how naive I was, but I didn't believe that we would do it. We know 60 Minutes sat on the Abu Ghraib torture story at the request of the Pentagon, only airing it when Cy Hirsch was going to publication in The New Yorker with images, or proof, as we like to say. When the story broke and the pictures were everywhere, my translator came to me, a curious and screwed up expression on her face. I had to look at her, tears in my eyes, and apologize for how wrong I was. Apologize for the behavior of my country. It was an important lesson that I'll never forget, that we need to be willing to listen and be open to challenging our own beliefs as journalists, or we aren't doing our job. Call it marketing or messaging, psychological operations, or whatever you like, but controlling the message of any event or issue deeply shapes the framework within which the public will think about it. The White House and the Pentagon did a brilliant job of shaping the message and controlling that framework around the Iraq war and invasion. Two specific things had a dramatic impact: the embedding process during the invasion, and secondly, the message that they crafted about who was attacking coalition troops after Baghdad fell. In the embedding process, journalists rode in the convoys, tanks, and armored personnel carriers with US soldiers as they invaded Iraq and took Baghdad. You bond and develop empathy with anyone that you suffer with, and it worked. US soldiers were humanized and shown as heroes. The enemy was dehumanized, faceless, violent, evil even. The effect was that the US public was brought on board with the killing of people, soldiers and innocents, because they were only shown human beings on our side in a complex situation. As the invasion turned to war and things got messy, The language used from the podium in Washington and Baghdad to describe those who attacked coalition forces was smart and effective. Dead-enders, Ba'athi diehards, common criminals, religious extremists, foreign fighters. The implication is that these are fringe elements of a society, that they don't represent any real or valid public sentiment. And because they're fringy, they can be identified, separated from the public, killed, and peace can be delivered. It is a lovely narrative, one I wish were true. And if I hadn't spent 10 months interviewing people who were involved in attacking coalition forces, I might have believed it too. I certainly would like to. The reality was a grassroots indigenous resistance to occupation that evolved quickly over the summer of 2003, making anything the US hoped to achieve in Iraq impossible. If you think I'm dreaming, or still naive, or suffering from some sort of Stockholm syndrome, go read the 2003 National Intelligence Estimate that was leaked in 2006. It deeply contradicted the White House and Pentagon's public message and implied an unwinnable war, certainly an inconvenient reality at that time. The media carried that clever messaging for a solid 2 years before it ever even questioned it, and then it was a limp interrogation. The US public is still confused by why we invaded Iraq, why we're still there, and why the Iraqis can't get themselves together. So those are examples of how journalism's parochial or national lens affects the public, both the American public and, frankly, the global public. At the beginning, I mentioned the opportunity presented by the digital era. We can now reach a global audience instantly, and I believe we can upgrade journalism's role to meet its amazing global reach. The opportunity takes two forms. The business opportunity is to develop a large and diverse global audience that pays a small annual membership to support its work. This delivers a grassroots-supported and, most importantly, financially independent business model for journalism. The civic opportunity, which for me is much more important, is to tell one story to that diverse audience, uniting us as a global community around our human story. The greatest challenges and opportunities that we face are transnational in nature. We must collaborate across our national and cultural differences to successfully manage them. And in order to collaborate, we must see ourselves as part of one interconnected human community, recognizing our shared interests. For all our differences as human beings, we share a core that profoundly outweighs them. At the end of the day, journalism is simply stories that help us understand our world. At Orb, we're using these stories to draw a picture of us as a global community of human beings. My personal hope is that by seeing ourselves as one, we may find ourselves on a path towards a more peaceful future. Most journalism happens like this. An event occurs, and journalism responds by covering that event as it evolves, drop by drop. Alain de Botton described the experience of journalism as reading the great novel Anna Karenina, but in a series of 500-word installments. The point, context, purpose, big picture of the narrative work is easily and quickly lost. Journalism is suffering from this, but frankly, so are we. In order to perceive the world as a whole and tell stories that feel relevant and resonate with a global, diverse audience, Orb has redesigned the editorial process. We've turned the classic reactive drop, drop, drop journalism process on its head. We diversify our naturally limited experience of the world by calling on the new tools of the digital era. We use data, which can embody and hold lots of understanding, but scattered like little drops across various silos of learning. And Orb is bringing those drops together into a cup of information that we can drink from, so we can see the world holistically and see what trends are evolving and how the world is changing. It delivers us understanding, it delivers us insights, and frankly, it challenges our assumptions about how we see the world. We can also engage the public. There's a lot of knowledge and experience out there in the public. That would be you. And on any given issue, Orb will tap into that knowledge by using social media and digital tools so that we can have access to that wisdom. And we put professional journalists in the field, teams of two who travel to multiple countries doing actual reporting, checking what we've learned through the data analysis and the public engagement. And their job is to distill what is often complex and contradictory information into the only thing that we as human beings have ever really been able to remember, learn from, or share, a compelling story. In order to tell one story to a large, diverse audience, or bears the burdens of making our single daily story accessible, we tell stories about issues that we all have in common, so food, water, energy, health, education, environment, trade, and governance. And we publish each story in 3 versions, a text version, an audio-only version, and a multimedia version to meet your consumption habits. And we publish in the 10 most widely spoken languages. We have a tone that is curious and learning, and we publish in a design that's used for those mobile devices for when we spend time in the cell phone region of our life. We do all this work for a very simple reason. We believe in individual agency. Every morning, each of us gets up and makes a series of decisions about what we will buy, how we will vote, what kind of work we will do, how we will do it, what we will tell our children about the world we live in, and their role in it. Individual knowledge shapes individual action. Our future isn't shaped by CEOs and presidents, but by the individual actions of the billions of people on this planet. We are living through the greatest transfer of power in history. Power is now defined by being able to make sense of the deluge of available information. Orb recognizes this and respects the public, placing an accurate picture of the world that we share in their hands. We live on a planet with a growing population, boundaried resources, and a habit of violence when things get tight. The path we're on today leads us to a conflict-ridden future. I've seen conflict up close. I've seen societies shredded and innocent lives demolished, and I believe that it's worth every effort to avoid. Journalism can unite us meaningfully by focusing on our common interests, telling stories in a way that builds compassion, empathy, and understanding across cultures. And that is what we seek to achieve. I'm going to invite you, I'm going to skip through these next slides, which are some examples of our work. I hope you'll go to our website and look at how we tell our stories a little differently. But come visit us at orbmedia.org and sign up to join us on our journey to unite the global community around our human story. And thank you.
Elda?
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here. It's an honor, and I'm extremely excited about sharing the stage and my thoughts. The audio part, the sound part of my presentation comes from me. The visual, the image part, was created by 2 17-year-olds whom I invited to interpret my thoughts. They had 7 hours, a chalkboard, a camera, and no internet. I have not seen the interpretation. I purposefully didn't want to see, because that's their interpretation of my thoughts. They couldn't contradict it, but they could interpret that. So you will be seeing it before I will. I need to stick to the script, and I need to do the clicker thing really well, because if I out of sync, it's not their fault, it's mine. Recently, Ancestry.com told me that my ancestral roots are planted in several world regions. According to my genetic DNA composition, I'm 89% European, 6% West Asian, 4% African, and 1% Pacific Islands. For this I cannot vouch, but what I can do is to tell you about the rest of my makeup. I was born in South Africa into white privilege, I grew up, made life choices, chose pathways, fought demons, and decided on action, but also celebrated victories at a time that Africa stood up, stood firm, paid an extremely high price, but slew the dragon of colonialism and white supremacy. This rootedness frames the lenses through which I look at our topic today. I speak as a privileged white person who is keenly aware of and deeply saddened about the fact that my own empowerment was gained at the cost of generations of fellow human beings. I speak too as a proud African whose fate is entwined with that of the continent of my birth. I speak as a woman who actively advocates for the dignity, equality, and justice for all human beings, no matter their differentiating markers, for the earth we live in and all of her creatures. Mine, too, are the thoughts of a journalist who will never claim that she knows the truth, and a Christian believer that embraces interfaith respect and cooperation. This is, I think, one of the most important things that I have learned. The world that we are living at the moment is absolutely flourishing with faith. And yet, violence, equality, and injustice are shattering lives and destroying souls as we speak and across the globe. Our world has never been more interconnected, yet more polarized, more discursive, yet more not talking to each other, more seamless, yet more divided. Telling is the fact that spirituality, communication, and violence were also the terrible triplets that worked in unison for more than 300 centuries to justify and maintain colonialism, apartheid, and so, well, first colonialism, slavery, and apartheid in South Africa. I think it's important that you allow me to unveil the mirror of my experience. You might or might not recognize something familiar. Throughout humankind's existence, people have been communicating, using cave wall drawings, storytelling, singing, dancing, chanting, the art, the written word, film, the airwaves, cyberspace, to capture, reflect on, and interpret reality. For the first South African colonialists and settlers, communication were at the heart of forging a new unifying identity, for building their power base, and for shaping the notion of Afrikaner exceptionalism. My own identity was molded by generational family narratives, teachers, preachers, and a communication industry that was anything but objective, independent, and free. With a fundamentalist Christian civil religion and the state's police and military, strategic communication were the pillars on which an unjust society rested. The media had a vital role to play to entrench what I call the great myth. The myth that Europeans and Westerners' presence in darkest Africa was a divine right and responsibility, and that God had called them to bring Christianity and civilization to that world region. The myth of their manifest destiny. The myth that the one who was not Western, white, Christian, or heterosexual was the barbarian, the heathen, the outsider, the other. The other might be a creature of God, but has been created decidedly less human, less civilized, less gifted, less moral, less trustworthy, less worthy, and thus less deserving. Whilst Puritan Christianity sanctified racism, heteropatriarchy, classism, land grab, and genocide, brutality cemented these in practice. Violence, physical, emotional, economic, and psychological violence kept power imbalances intact. The dominant white-controlled media was as alienating and oppressive as the spirituality and the violence that characterized white supremacy. Every act of communication, no matter what the medium is that is used, is shaped by a perspective or perspectives. The storyline cannot be detached from the storyteller. The storyteller can, as much as he or she tries, not be completely detached from her or his position, their experiences, and their interests. For example, for person A, a glass is half full. For person B, the same glass is half empty. What the strategist says doesn't matter, whatever. Just say what you believe the loudest, all the time, and over and over and over again, and it will become the truth. In pre-democratic South Africa, mainstream communication prioritized and legitimized the values, lived experiences, and agendas of the powerful. The overriding task of the dominant media was to play their part in preserving the great myth. The media and public trust. What my South African experience has taught me, that in a fragmented and unequal society, this question prompts another one. What public? Those citizens that enjoyed privilege, respect, and dignity trusted the daily news like they trusted their Bible. Why not? Their understanding of reality was voiced the loudest, all the time, over and over, and had become their truth. The master's voice was telling the South African story. Voices that offered alternative interpretations, alternative truths, were marginalized, muted, or completely silenced. The daily realities in the trenches of exclusion, oppression, exploitation, and suffering never made the headlines, the screens, or the airwaves, never disturbed the equilibrium and the consciousness of the privileged, never blemished the notion of a hard-working, God-fearing Christian nation. The other, and those who fought in support and solidarity for their freedoms and rights, were demonized, kept on the outside through stereotypes and stigmas, naming and framing, trivialization and superficiality, and repetition and omission. Word choices, phrasing, image selection, and commentary solidified the following dominant truths. People of color, especially men, are uncivilized, stupid, lazy, dishonest, violent, oversexed, and dangerous. White heterosexual Christian men are civilized, intelligent, honorable, reliable, assertive, courageous, and charming. Women, particularly women of color, are emotional, manipulative, and shrewd. All women are happy, complacent sexual tools. A good woman is heterosexual, prioritizes marriage, is caring, nurturing, gentle, and mostly mindless. An independent woman is a Jezebel. People with non-conforming gender and sexual identities and lifestyles are abominations. Non-Christians and non-believers are evil. The freedom fighter is the terrorist. Civil protest is anarchy. Violence in God's name is righteous. Among those on the receiving end of these truths, there was no trust in the dominant media, just contempt, anger, and a fierce commitment to give voice to their own perspectives and interpretations and to capture and distribute the narratives of their lived realities, ideals, and hopes. In other words, to find alternative modes of strategic communication. From the underside of history, they carved a pathway away from violence towards liberation, equality, empowerment, and justice. That public kept on telling their own stories and shaping their own truths, and in so doing unmasked the true nature of a hard-working, God-fearing Christian nation that was built on the quicksand of injustice and inequality. The media and public trust. I believe that an honest and constructive conversation about this topic anywhere in our world today is also a frank discussion about the fact that strategic communication, the media, is value-laden and prioritizes specific perspectives. Strategic communication connects, entertains, and informs, but it also either challenges or reinforces inequality and injustice. It matters what media dominates. It truly matters in the time that we are living in a time that massive human displacement, destructive environmental degradation and violence, extreme economic inequality, sexism, homophobia, ethnic conflict, religious and cultural exclusivism, violence are as real and prevalent as it has been or these have been for times gone by. Today, South Africa can still not, or South Africans, in one voice but many tongues, tell the story, the truth of a diverse yet reconciled society that has been built on the solid rock of equality and justice. But we are moving forward, and every day we are shouldering fierce challenges of transformation. As for me, I will forever keep on trying to do what I can to make right what went wrong.
Rajiv.
To the wonderful organizers of this incredible event, I was privileged to be here 3 years ago, and I'm delighted to be back. My friend Mustafa, Sarah, so many wonderful people here who make this very important event possible. I wear two hats, really. My passion and my vocation is to work with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and to serve him, and my profession is in the media. I manage a small not-for-profit called the Public Service Broadcasting Trust. we support the production as commissioning editor and mentor of 52 independent documentary films a year. We've been doing this for over a decade. We have supported 650 independent documentary films. Our films win huge, huge critical acclaim. 2/3 of them are made by starting out filmmakers, 50% by women. For every film we make, we get 2 film festival selections. For every 2.5 films, 2-point-something films, we win an award. Our films are made at very modest budgets of less than $10,000 each. But despite this recognition, we find very little public space for the films to be seen. We're often asked how we manage such a high success rate of conversion of films made by young people to film festival selections and awards. To be true to our faith, we do not work with anger or malice. We do not make films idly. We do not work merely to excite passion. The viewer can no longer respond in the manner that he does to public media, and there's no sense of the restraint we have to exercise from week to week in choice of subjects and our vocabulary. It is a training for all of us. It enables us to peek into ourselves and to make discoveries of our weaknesses. Often our vanity dictates a smart expression or an exciting visual, and anger, a harsh objective. It is a terrible ordeal, but a fine exercise to remove these weeds. These are not my words. This is a paraphrase of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was, of course, an activist, an apostle for nonviolent peace. But he was also associated with 6 publications, and 2 of which he was editor, Young India and Harijan. And I think that in revisioning these lines to share with our community of filmmakers, there is a very important lesson for journalism, and that is the integrity and the authenticity of the communicator. That is the ultimate truth and the ultimate reality that makes for effective, powerful communication. There are many influential voices in the media who embody these aspirations. We're privileged to have some of them on the stage. And for those of you who are here for the duration of the conference, there are people like Pico Iyer, Vandana Shiva, and several others who I don't personally know, but would like to celebrate. But these individual voices who have the courage and the confidence to stand up and articulate their visions are overwhelmed by the cacophony of the mass media and its impact on global consciousness. It has been our aspiration at this tiny NGO that I manage to try and understand what are the obstacles that we confront that keep our critically acclaimed content from actually being received, processed, and seen and responded to. I think we have underestimated the power of the corporation and the power of governments to influence and manage media. Commercially driven content across the board, whether it is excluding the marginalized in South Africa or the disenfranchised and disadvantaged poor in India, is because commercially driven media does not deliver content. It delivers eyeballs to advertisers. And inherent in that model is the exclusion
of people who are not consumers of goods and services, or the points of view, including encouraging consumerism, that do not interest or will discourage advertisers from placing advertisements in those newspapers. We have had horrifying experiences. We made a film on the pesticides in Coca-Cola as marketed in India. It was horrifying that India, well, we now think it's more a developed country than a developing one, that the groundwater that Coca-Cola was sourcing had pesticides in it, and there were different standards that were being applied to Coca-Cola marketed in the United States or being marketed in India, for example. Now, Coca-Cola, as being one of the largest advertisers, certainly in India, and I would imagine in this country, were able to exclude our film from dissemination, and when screened, were able to pack the audience with people who sought to disrupt the presentation. We did another film on paid news, on the manner in which political parties and governments are able, through the use of advertising space, to influence opinion, or for that matter, the pharmaceutical industry that will conceal or hide or encourage stories to be wished away. I mean, how widely has it been reported in the United States of the implications and the impact of Johnson's baby powder on cervical cancer? Where is that story? How many of us have followed the story of Volkswagen and the way, sort of the epitome of capitalist success and credibility, and their fixing of the software in their cars so that they can get away with meeting the United States emission standards. So these are some of the kinds of obstacles that we confront. The internet was held up as this great possibility of democratizing the media. Quite apart from the challenges of access that large communities have, again, the disenfranchised and disadvantaged who cannot afford internet, including in this country, internet penetration in the United States around 70-75%. The people who actually need that kind of access, I don't know how widely it's been reported about the algorithms that Google will use to prioritize news. That how you can go onto a website for $100, ensure that your website will get 30,000 hits. We had a failed initiative, thank God, of Facebook wanting to come into India and riding on the backs of internet service providers and offering a free Facebook facility along with free internet access. So obviously, the advertising and agendas that Facebook wished to promote could then be presented. So I think we need to be mindful as consumers of media that not merely is the credibility and authenticity of the journalist who originates the material frequently in question, but the entire production and dissemination of news is challenged at the very least. And what is the solution to this? Because I think, many journalists for whom journalism is a job, after all. And, Gandhi says somewhere that the sole aim of journalism should be service. The newspaper is a great power. But just as an unchained torrent of water submerges whole countrysides and devastates crops, even so an uncontrolled pen serves but to destroy. If the control is from without, it proves more poisonous than want of control. It can only be profitable when the control is from within. There are certain spheres of work, he says, which are of such consequence and have such a bearing on public welfare that to undertake them for earning one's livelihood will defeat the primary aim behind them. Of course, that is, one would argue, a utopian idealism. But then so is, in many ways, the idea of nonviolence that we are here to celebrate. because the essence of nonviolence is internal transformation, is internal disarmament before we can go out into the larger field of action. And somewhere, every one of us who engages in journalism in some measure or the other will have to engage with our conscience. And as consumers of the media, it is very difficult in terms of the choices that are available to us. We often complain about, this program or that program for its explicit sexuality or its excessive violence. But we all do have an option as powerful as the vote in a democracy, and that is the switch off button. We all have that opportunity to use it and to send out a message, no matter how small, which will, from a million different centers of energy and daring, come together, and I believe can sweep away in many of the cobwebs that clutter the media space. And that is the switch off button. Let's use it. Thank you.
Peace be upon you all. I'm very humbled and honored to be here in this space and just moved deeply to my core by everything that I've heard today. So my gratitude to all of you. I stand here in the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful. For many of you, it's probably the same experience. Every time I hear about Muslims or Islam, it's always a conversation that is about us without us. There's always many trying to tell our stories, tell you who we are, what we believe, and oftentimes they are not Muslims who are telling you those stories. The stories that are being told are usually on two sides. We're either oppressed women or victims of violence, or we are perpetrators of violence. And there are stories that are in the middle that are not being told. And I say to you today that the only person who can tell my story is me. Only I can tell my story. I stand here before you unapologetically Muslim. I am not a scholar of Islam, nor am I a theologian. I am a believer in God. A big God, a God who created us all, a God who loves us all. I'm a Muslim New Yorker. And on the day of 9/11, I was the New Yorker that went out in my college campus, put my hand out into the air, and felt the burned pieces of paper that fell into my hand. A day that changed my life forever. I am an activist moved by the core tenets of my faith of Islam: love, compassion, and justice. Oftentimes you hear people say that Islam is a religion of peace. And I say to people, I don't think you're adding anything to the conversation. I believe that all religions are religions of peace. But what is most important to me about Islam is that Islam is a religion of justice. O you who believed, be persistently standing firm in justice, witnesses for Allah, even if it be against yourselves, your parents, or your relatives, whether one is rich or poor. So follow not personal inclination, lest you not be just. And if you distort your testimony or refuse to give it, then indeed Allah in ever with what you do is acquainted. This is from a passage from the Quran that is very fundamental to the work that I do. For the past 15 years, I have bore witness to injustice against my communities and communities of color here in my beloved country, the United States of America. I have witnessed deportations and separations of families. I have witnessed imprisonment of innocent fathers and brothers. I have witnessed entire communities under siege, under unwarranted surveillance, just for the virtue of who they are or for the religion that they follow. I have witnessed the murders of unarmed young black and brown people with impunity in my country. Oftentimes we hear about the inspiration of people like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King, and I say to people that 1,400 years before Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, I had my own civil rights leader, my own human rights leader, my own activist, my own feminist in his own right, my beloved Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him. My faith gives me the moral courage to be who I am, to continue to believe in what I believe. For many people, and many people of faith, religion is used as a way of spirituality, of individual spirituality and strengthening of one's own character. And Islam is very much the same, but Islam is also a practical faith. We must believe in our hearts, but we must also act with our tongues, hands, and feet. For me, religion, faith, and spirituality is found in the heart of the very social justice movements that I'm a part of. Activism for me is an act of worship, that when I am on the streets alongside young black and brown people fighting for justice or fighting against injustice, or when I am getting arrested in civil disobedience, I believe that that is an act of worship, that I am being spiritual, that I am standing firmly in the religion that I believe in. I believe that we all have a responsibility as people of faith. And I believe that in everything that I do, that one day I will meet my Lord, and my Lord will ask me, what did you do when there was injustice around you? What did you say? How did you treat those around you? How did you use the blessings that I gave you to uplift others? And I work every day to make sure that I have the very best answers to ensure that God opens those gates of heaven for people like me and those who are the most oppressed and marginalized in this world. And I come from a place to organize on the issues that I care about with a quote that is in my office, and it is by an Aboriginal woman in Australia, Leela Watson. And it says, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because you believe that your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. My gratitude to the Festival of Faiths, to all the scholars, intellectuals, to my teachers who are also amongst you, Dr. Ingrid Mattson, Imam Zaid Shakir, and others. I am grateful to be given this opportunity amongst giants and people who continue to inspire me to be a person of faith, to be a true believer, and to be a moral compass for those in our society who have lost their way. Thank you very much.
All of these wonderful presentations spark very many questions in my own mind and heart. I would like, however, to turn to the audience to hear other voices who might like to question you. We do have a very limited amount of time this afternoon. We are going to end exactly at 4 o'clock. So those of you who would like to ask a question of this panel, please raise your hands and do so. Is the microphone available to us? Is the microphone available?
In the meantime, maybe you could ask a question on our behalf, and then we'll get the microphone.
I'd be happy to, because I am a consumer of media and in no ways an expert. And I have to confess that every day of my life I am on the internet and I'm looking at 5 or 6 different sources of information. I find myself extremely disappointed, particularly when I begin to read the comments sections of any article that I'm reading. My inclination these days is to withdraw, to say that I'm no longer going to read media. I'm going to stay in my little corner of my 70-year-old world and hope for the best, usque ad mortem, which is Latin for unto my death. But I want to ask each of you, or whoever wishes to respond, how you would admonish me to be a wiser consumer of media than I am confessing that I am not. So that's a difficult question, and it can be just one simple thing that you might tell me to do other than just turn it off.
I have a suggestion, which is read whatever the main story is of the day in whatever your publication of choice is, and consider the parts of the story that haven't been told. Like what's been left out, which angles of the story have not appeared in that piece. And I think you're well read enough that, at least for a lot of that, you'll be able to come up with a series of them. And that may not be entirely satisfying, but I think it might calm your sense that you will find some truth out there if you keep looking.
I hear you, thank you.
Yeah, I keep on thinking of, to use a metaphor, when you tell someone I'm thirsty, and I offer you a cup, and I say, please drink, it will help your thirst, but it's poison I'm giving you. So you will be, I think our problem is that the dominant media, the media that's dominating globally, and I've got the privilege to claim immunity because I'm not from the US, so I can't wield power and the expertise of here, but in general, basically, there is something like dominant media, and we need to accept that if you really truly want to find out what's happening, first of all, understand there's not one reality, there are different realities, and understand that the dominant media in the world are framed from dominant perspectives. So it might mean that you will have to find alternative ways, or let me speak for I constantly tell myself, you are being dumbed down. You are being dumbed down. You are being dumbed down. Try and get knowledge. So you need to find a way, I agree with Molly, to see what is available. For instance, your wonderful initiative that you have, and make sure that you understand that you have to gather as much as possible information that's not controlled. The best part would be for me, just in your context, is to step yourselves into realities. Is why do you have to use a conduit? Why don't you just step into the trenches of your country? Step out of what is familiar and comfortable and say, I don't have to travel to Syria to go find out what the truth is, which we should all find out all the time, because as we speak, people are dying because other people kill them. But in your own reality, to step out of the comfortable place of your clicker or your phone, and to say, I need to go find out what's really happening in reality. It means you must brave, brave.
Thank you. I think we may have the microphone now. So are there any questions? Yes.
This is for Elna. Was there any special event that started apartheid, or was it a gradual thing that happened?
There, and I have to thank our teacher that started the session, that pointed out that life is a continuing journey, and I'm still on that journey, and that identity for me is not a stagnant thing, it's constantly changing, and hopefully I've moved towards becoming a bigger human being. But the event that really triggered me was long before that day when I decided there is no God, and then discovered God later again. I discovered that when I was 10 years old. And we were traveling from our family farm. My father was a dentist in town and my mother was a teacher, but we lived in the privilege of a farm. We still had a farm that, and we were driving on the dirt road, and it was the winter, and I was sitting in our luxury vehicle, all four of us, and we were driving, and I saw children running next to the road. And they disappeared in this dust behind us. And that evening, the woman that was a mother in our home, that was part of that other, she was very close to me and I close to her. And I said to her, Lena, I saw the children running next to the road this morning. And they were smoking. They had smoke. And she looked patiently at me and she said, they were not smoking, they were cold. And I said, we should ask Mama to take them to school. They were running to school. And she looked patiently and she said, they cannot, Maletsatsi. I said, why not? The bus then, can we take the bus? Can they? She said, no, they cannot, Maletsatsi. And I said to her, why? Curiosity.
Yeah.
That's the first time I said, why can they not get into the bus? And you know what she said? It is the way it is. And it was just not a good enough answer. But from that day on, it didn't make sense to me. I wanted to know why.
Another question?
So my question is for all of you guys. Every day we see that the media itself edits itself, but not in a positive way. It's like almost always one-sided. They point out stuff that is completely irrelevant and leave out all that is valid. We are seeing that especially our youth is being affected by it almost where they're not interested in the news anymore. They're not interested in what is happening outside their circles. How, as common people, can we counter that? Not as from a journalistic point of view, but from somebody who is really, being beaten down by the mainstream media.
It's a great question.
Well, I'm afraid I'm a skeptic as far as the media is concerned. And I think it's the media's perception that good news doesn't sell and that there aren't enough consumers of good news. And that is, unfortunately, partially true, because when there have been micro initiatives that have sought to just do a newspaper with good news, it hasn't found buyers. Or even on there's a wonderful, it's called Upworthy News on the net. If you log into that, it gives you good news. And even in newspapers who have tried to have sections that give positive news, they usually wind down because they're not supported by advertising. And it just goes back to my sort of hypothesis that because of the very nature of our culture, of our society, of our economic models and our economic systems, where the media is driven by advertising and ultimately commercial imperatives. So both what people are assumed not to want and what they don't want, even though it's good for them, is rarely going to find its place in the media.
I kind of like what Elna was talking about, get out and learn about your own community. I mean, maybe even just suggesting an oral history with somebody in their community, right? Where they can begin to learn that this person has been engaged with things that they know about or have heard about in their lives and connect what happens out there to people that they can know. And that might make it more real for them in a way that media is not doing particularly effective, and quite close, right, and present in a way that journalism doesn't do necessarily very well right now.
It's interesting that, in classic storytelling or narrative structures, essential to the story is conflict. Mm-hmm. So character A wants something, or struggles with something, overcomes conflict, and then achieves it. And how many movies have you seen where once this process is over, the happy couple, or James Bond with the woman of his choice, and it just sort of fades away. So the happiness, the fulfillment part of it is very rarely developed. I'm not sure why. I'd always be interested in what happened as they walked into the sunset, and savored, the joy of having overcome the struggle. But for reasons I'm not sure as to why, our narrative structures don't allow for that, and that will take for a philosopher perhaps.
I think I'm just going to say, 2 17-year-olds, interpret that. They were not allowed a cell phone or anything. They had to think, and young people think. They do, and they connect, and they care, and they have compassion, and they feel about justice, but we need to empower them. They should be here telling us. They should be here, not me.
Wonderful. On this very powerful note, I'm going to have to bring this wonderful session to a close. I hope you all will join me in thanking our 4 speakers this afternoon.